This is King World News. I'm Eric King, and you're about to hear a tremendous interview with both Bill Murphy and Chris Powell in this special edition Gold Brief with GATA. Remember to go to our homepage at www.kingworldnews.com for more interviews, where this week we also have Mr. Gold, the legendary Jim Sinclair from jsmindset.com, Gerald Salente of the Trends Research Institute, as well as Chris Whalen, Managing Director of Institutional Risk Analytics. And on the Gold Plus page, we will be starting a 4-part systemic failures series with Jim Willey of the Hat Trick Letter. Joining us now is Bill Murphy and Chris Powell in this week's special Gold Brief with GATA segment. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on. You guys had big news this week, let's face it. Let's talk about this news release from GATA. It was about the Fed engaging in gold swaps or admitting to that. They had previously denied that to GATA in 2001. Bill, let's start with you on this.
Well, Chris did all the work on this with our lawyers, so thanks, Eric. But I'm going to hand it off to my buddy here. Go ahead, Chris.
This seems to be the first contemporaneous admission from the Federal Reserve that it is involved in the gold market in the here and now, or at least is contemplating being involved in the gold market now. The letter we got from the Fed in response to our Freedom of Information request was another denial, but it disclosed something. It disclosed that among the records that the Fed wants to deny GATA access to are records of the Fed's gold swap arrangements with foreign banks. Now, that doesn't mean that the Fed is engaging in gold swaps right now. It says only that the Fed has gold swap arrangements with foreign banks. There's a reference to the U.S. government being involved in gold swaps in the 1995 minutes of the Federal Open Market Committee, but in 2001, the Fed vigorously denied to GATA from Alan Greenspan, the Fed chairman himself, that the Fed had anything to do with gold swaps. So perhaps back in 2001, when the Fed denied this to us, there were no gold swaps or gold swap arrangements. But as of today, Kevin Warsh, a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, has put in writing to GATA that the Fed has gold swap arrangements with foreign banks. We happen to think that's a major development. It's an acknowledgement of U.S. government intervention in the gold market surreptitiously.
This whole thing is just a big farce. President Obama talked about greater transparency. So, us U.S. citizens, we go out under the Freedom of Information Act and want to know what's going on in the gold market. About 6-8 months, a year ago, they came back and the Fed gave us something like 300 pages of piddly garbage, and 400 pages they redacted of what we wanted to know. Now they come back and say, this is not what we're going to tell the public. Well, that's what our whole thing's been all about for a decade. It's a total farce. And Obama is a farce in this regard.
Well, it's very plain that the U.S. government is doing surreptitious things in various markets. And if the public and the markets were to find out the full extent of the intervention, they'd be very different. And we just hope that we can awaken the investment world, and particularly the gold world, to what's going on here, because it will continue and will continue to erode the value of our investments if the gold world does not wake up and clamor about it.
Gentlemen, let me ask you something. There is an audit of the Fed gaining momentum right now, and then I find it interesting with this momentum building. A couple of things. Number one, it was a very strange reaction from the Fed, right? Because the Fed said, well, you can't do this because if you do this, the dollar will collapse, interest rates will spike up, and it will be very damaging for all citizens. That is an odd reaction to an audit taking place. And secondly, the whole premise around GATA, and I believe you gentlemen to be correct, is that they have basically utilized what I think is the U.S. citizens' gold, and they have basically the Fed, which is an illegal organization as far as I'm concerned, that was artificially put in through Congress and is not constitutional, has taken the people's gold and used this to support their dollar, which is backed by nothing anymore, and they have used this gold to artificially suppress the price of gold and make the dollar look stronger than in reality it would otherwise be. Now you have this Fed audit gaining momentum, and all of a sudden they say to you guys, well, geez, you know what, we do have gold swaps. Do you find the timing of that strange?
You know, Eric, I think that the disclosure may not have been intended. It's hard for me to understand why the Fed suddenly would be so candid about this, unless the Fed governor to whom our appeal was referred was just a totally straight, above-board guy who didn't get the memo about the gold price suppression scheme.
Well, if I might add, it's really intriguing because it can be what Chris says, or it could be somebody that went to a conference here in Spokane said, there's really good people in the government that want to get stuff out. They don't want to get fired, but they want to get stuff out because they're sick and tired of what's going on. And this guy couldn't have let the cat out of the bag more, right there. I mean, that's what it is. And all our naysayers are now, instead of dealing with the truth here, they're swearing because it's pathetic.
Yeah, but getting back to the question of auditing the Fed, Eric, the Fed's position basically is that the world will collapse if it knows what the Fed is doing. And well, I have to hope that they're not quite right, but I would agree that if the full range of the Fed's intervention in the market was known, the world would be a very different place. The Federal Reserve is built on deception and secrecy, and as one of its members back 15 years ago, Alan Blinder, I think he was vice chairman of the Fed, said on public television in the United States, quote, "The last duty of a central banker is to tell the public the truth," unquote. Well, we would like the truth, and we don't think it's unreasonable to ask for it.
Eric, and if I might say, GATA put out a $264,000 full-page color ad in the Wall Street Journal, January 31st, 2008, in which we talked about this very subject and told the American people what the deal was. No one paid any attention. The chickens are going to come home to roost, and it's exciting for maybe, I can speak for myself personally, but it's going to be a horror show for the American public once they realize what's going on here and how they've been fleeced.
Let me ask you something, Bill, and Chris, you respond to this also. As this is disclosed, if it comes out that basically the world looks in on the United States and says, well, wait a minute, half of the gold is gone, or over half of the gold is gone, right? Because we're supposed to be the biggest holders of gold. Doesn't that make the rest of the world look in on us and say, well, then what's left? A country with a massive banana republic like debt to GDP ratio, backed by essentially next to nothing because the gold is gone or most of it's gone. Isn't that where the dollar collapses? Can they really reveal that they don't have the gold, is my question to you, Bill. Can they afford to do that?
Well, that's what God is all about. All I can say is, at least from, again, speaking for myself, I think for God, is that the whole thing's getting worse and worse and worse because they're running out of physical gold to keep the manipulation going. And it's all going to fall apart. And that's the question of how bad and when they want to face the music.
Chris?
Eric, the gold price suppression scheme really is the foundation stone of the rigging of all markets and the exploitation of the rest of the world by the United States. It has corrupted our country. It's corrupted our markets. It's corrupted really every citizen who has a dollar to spend or a dollar to earn and really has no clue as to what the markets are about. And it's exploited the world, and we hope that the world is waking up to it. It's the device by which the United States has borrowed the rest of the world's money to consume for things that can never be repaid. And this is a horrible state of affairs. It's a crime against the world, and it's really the destruction of our own country's integrity. And it's got to be stopped as soon as possible because it's only going to get worse if it's not.
Let me ask you something, Chris, and Bill also. This is what I've never understood. If the U.S. government and the Fed engaged in this and they artificially suppressed the price of gold, because as you two gentlemen know, this has caused tremendous suffering in some of these third world resource-rich countries, such as South Africa, for instance, where for every miner there's 10 dependents really inside the economy depending on that. But this massive poverty, and we'll just look at South Africa and the massive spread of AIDS and the death and the human suffering that's there. Unless you categorize those people as subhuman, that would mean that the Fed and these people that were involved in this have essentially committed crimes against humanity. Is that right, or is that a stretch?
This is one of my pet peeves because I toured South Africa in 2001 and explained this, and as you well know, Eric, because you're right on top of this stuff, what was going on. And you've got Clinton and Bush and Obama talking about they want to help the poor and help Africa. What a bunch of crud. Because if they just let gold trade freely, especially in this country that's affected so badly by terrible economics and AIDS and so on, the gold price would have been double what it is today. There would be boom times down in that area. We wouldn't have to do anything. I mean, because then it would engender upon itself. these people speak with forked tongues, at least in this specific subject. So, yes, you're right on. And it's going to come out, and it's going to be a blight on when I see President Clinton go around and how he's loved by all these people. I get sick to my stomach.
Eric, the overconsumption in the United States with borrowed money borrowed from the rest of the world, is the reciprocal of that suffering around the world that you're talking about. It is the primary mechanism of imperialism today. Imperialism is not implemented today primarily with occupying armies. It's implemented through the overvaluation of the dollar and the borrowing, the infinite borrowing that the United States is allowed to do. The suppression of the gold